with CBTV News, and we're in partnership with Potomac Local. Today we will have Democratic candidate Josh Cole and Republican candidate Mr. Paul Milde. And reporters today will be David Kerr with CBTV News and Uriah Kaiser from Potomac Local. He is also the editor and publisher of Potomac Local. Today's format will be as such. We have had a coin toss, and the candidates will be given opening remarks. It'll be limited to 2 minutes each. Thereafter, candidates will be asked questions by our moderators with a response time of 1 minute. Then, in subsequent and final segments, candidates will be allowed to respond for 1 minute and may pose a 30-second rebuttal if they so choose. Best wishes to both of you, and please accept these best wishes. May your words be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to respond well to your constituents. Thank you.
Thank you. I am Paul Milde. I wanted to thank David Kerr and Uriah Kaiser and CBTV and Potomac Local for hosting this event. I served 12 years on the Stafford County Board of Supervisors. My last year, a year and a half ago, I served as chairman. That was my final year. On the board, I focused on quality of life issues. I successfully fought for $1.3 billion in transportation improvements that you can see happening up and down the 95 corridor and all over Stafford now. I supported budgets that raised teachers' pay, renovated our schools, and built new ones. I championed preserving open spaces, green spaces like the Crow's Nest, Government Island, the Civil War Park in Stafford, and many others from development, over 10,000 acres. And we did all that, and we lowered taxes also. That record speaks for itself. During my tenure, we raised all 3 of our bond ratings from AA's to AAA's and became first in Virginia in job growth in a 5-year rolling average from the VEC. And we made Stafford more livable and more affordable. Now I'm running for delegate, and on that positive record of results, and I'm asking for your support.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Cole, and I am the Democratic candidate for the House of Delegates in the 28th District. That's the city of Fredericksburg and Stafford County. I do want to thank David and Uriah, Potomac Local, and CBTV for this awesome opportunity. I grew up here in Stafford County. This has been my home. This is my mother's, my father's home. They all grew up here. They were products of Stafford County Public School, as was I. And as someone who grew up here, it was concerning to me that we would have elected officials that would travel down to Richmond every year and fight for different things that I felt were not representing of the people of Stafford County. You know, I grew up and I watched how many parents, whether they were single mothers or single fathers, travel up and down the highway every single day, get stuck in our traffic, and spend 2 to 4 hours trying to get back home to take care of their families. I've watched as citizens who lived here in the city of Fredericksburg and Stafford County couldn't afford to just work one job, but they've had to work multiple jobs to make ends meet. I've watched how many different people from all different backgrounds have found themselves in hard situations, and we have to make sure that this November we are electing legislators that are going to fight for everybody. And after spending time in the General Assembly as a chief of staff, as a staffer for the state Senate, it's time that we replace the same old politicians with new voices who are going to fight for everybody. And that's why I'm running to be your next delegate.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for those opening remarks. I am Uriah Kaiser. I'm the publisher of Potomac Local News. Thank you both for being here today. The first question goes to Mr. Milde. Do you support or oppose the Equal Rights Amendment? Would you please explain your position?
Well, of course I support equal rights for women. I was raised by a single mother in the 70s and late 60s. And I'm an only child. And imagine she was a secretary, and imagine the series Mad Men. That's what it was really like back then for a secretary. And my mom raised me, and she paid for both of our bills. So I'm all for equal rights, and I am certainly supporting any legislation that will accomplish that and continue to enshrine that. I'm bothered by the thought that somebody wouldn't do that. Plus, I have a daughter. But I don't believe the ERA amendment is actually a viable option anymore. It expired in the 80s, and so I've considered it a wedge issue that Democrats have been putting forward to try to divide people on that issue, and it's just not the right way to go. We can do that through federal legislation, state legislation that already exists, and it should be enforced. But I am definitely for support equal rights for women.
Thank you, Mr. Milde.
Mr. Cole.
Mr. Cole? I'll
Thank
ask
you.
you the same question. 1 minute to respond. Do you support or oppose the Equal Rights Amendment? Please, would you explain your position?
Thank you. Yes, I fully support the Equal Rights Amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment has been here, and we've been trying to get it passed for quite a while now. With any legislation, anything that comes with a deadline, it can be reintroduced. And we're waiting for the 38th state to ratify it. I believe Virginia can be that 38th state. We can take it to Congress, and we can get it passed.
Rebuttal? That's still allowed?
Yes.
Yeah. So, but it was started in the 70s, I believe, and started getting ratified, and in the 80s, it expired, and so there is no provision in it. The Congress set an expiration date. It would have to be redone from Congress, not from the state level.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Milde. That next question goes to, we start with Josh Cole. We both get the same question. And it's an important important topic in your district, teacher salaries. And one of the most significant contributors to our school budget outside of our local taxes is the state, contributing as much as 50% sometimes. Would you support increasing state support for teacher salaries, even if it meant higher taxes?
I think that's very key to understand that we do need to raise teacher salary. Here in Stafford County, roughly the median teacher salary is just over $46,000 a year. And to maintain a one-bedroom apartment, pay all your bills, you have to make $65,000 a year. So we definitely need to raise teacher pay. I've always talked about before raising taxes, there's other methods we need to look at. One of the major issues we can look at is the state lotto. When it was created in the 80s, it was created for education, and consistently we have taken away from that. We can restore that funding back from the state lotto, and we can do that before we raise taxes.
Mr. Milde.
Thank you. We somewhat agree. Of course, I will stand with the Republicans in the House of Delegates who raised teachers' pay 5% and have pledged to do so for the next 4 years in Richmond. But there is no extra money in Lotto. That money already is dedicated to schools. And so the idea that there's another pot of money that we haven't tapped into is just not true, or accurate, I should say. And my opponent has a lot of ideas that are very expensive, and the question about raising tax, the answer is no, I don't think we have to raise taxes to do it. And we've done, so far the Republicans leading the House of Delegates have done that first down payment on their promise.
Just as a point of reference, only 28% of the proceeds from the lotto go towards education right now. So there's a lot more we can pull back from the state lotto. On top of that, the Republicans in the House of Delegates have consistently blocked raising teacher pay for the past couple of years. We finally got a 5% raise this year.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. We'll be moving on to the next question. And this one goes to Mr. Milde. For many years, there has been a discussion of studying the possibility of expanding Northern Virginia's Washington, D.C.'s metro system to our neighbors to the north, Prince William County. This would have a profound effect on the entire region when it comes to commuting. Would you support the state conducting and funding such a study?
To Prince William
To
County.
Prince William County.
Yes, I think that the time has come to certainly study the viability of expanding Metro to Prince William County. I served 2 years as a chairman of the Virginia Railway Express and 10 years on the operations board. So I'm very familiar with, and on PRTC as well, I'm very familiar with the multimodal transportation options that we have and that we use. VRE right now is providing a service that would be duplicated with a metro service. So we have to think about what's the better investment. We've certainly almost doubled ridership on VRE in the last 20 years. I think we have doubled in the last 20 years, almost doubled it in my tenure in the last 14 years. So I'm all for smart multimodal solutions, but they have to make sense.
All right, Mr. Milde, thank you. Mr. Cole, I'll ask you the same question. You have 1 minute to respond. For many years, there has been a discussion of studying the possibility of expanding Washington, D.C.'s metro system to Prince William County. This would have a profound effect on our entire region when it comes to commuting. Would you support the state conducting such a study? 1 minute.
I absolutely agree that the state should create a study focusing on bringing the metro down to Prince William County. I also think we need to focus our attention in higher areas as well, whether it's fully funding the VRE and making sure that we get weekend services there, or even creating a high-speed rail through the region. Bringing the metro down to Prince William County is a great idea, but I think there's other ideas that we can focus on faster to get there, but I fully support that.
Follow up. The VRE's budget is fully funded. It's an autonomous group on which I sat for 10 or maybe even 11 years, and they create their service. They don't look outside of themselves except for grants from the state for capital improvements. Not much operating funding. So the idea that they're not fully funded is just slightly inaccurate.
Thank you, Mr. Milde. And Mr. Cole.
Oh, right. Excuse me. Gentlemen, let's start with Mr. Milde. What additional measures would you support to improve the environmental quality of the Chesapeake Bay?
Oh, you know, another one of my passions, of course, is land. As a Republican, I'm in a rarer breed of Republican that supports open space preservation, and we put 10,000 acres in conservation in the most sensitive parts of Stafford while I was on the board. We had almost none, fewer than 500 acres. That, of course, is one of the ways you stop runoff and pollution into the Chesapeake Bay is by setting aside open space, especially riparian open space from development. So I supported that. The purchase of development rights program in Stafford, I helped create that, and the transfer of development rights program, and also just a hardy conservation program. I also supported the Rappahannock River easement that Fredericksburg put on both sides of the Rappahannock River, except the ones they wanted to develop. So I'm in favor of taking land that's most closest to the water out of development when it's not trampling on people's property rights.
Mr. Cole.
Thank you for the question. I think it's very key to focus on the areas, not just land conservation, but also protection for our air, protection for our water. Many people are not aware that the Rappahannock River that runs through this district was rated number 3 in the nation for pollution endangerment by fracking. So we need to make sure we are banning fracking in the Commonwealth of Virginia because many people aren't aware that it is happening. We ban fracking that protects the Rappahannock River, which feeds into the Potomac River and the Chesapeake Bay. And then we perform measures that will protect not just our land, but also our air and our water. And we can certainly do that from a state legislative perspective.
And I also supported the other efforts, the Tri-County Water and Soil Board locally that works with farmers to make sure that helps them keep their cattle and their grazing animals away from creeks. We had a lot of pollution that way too. I do not know how much fracking is contributing to polluting the Rappahannock, which is one of the more pristine rivers in the whole East Coast.
Thank you, gentlemen. The next question goes to Mr. Cole. Do you support a state constitutional amendment to create a bipartisan redistricting commission to draw the boundaries for the Commonwealth's House and Senate districts? 1 minute.
Absolutely. I think we need to fight for redistricting reform in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And for years now, both Democrats and Republicans have had a power issue with gerrymandering the maps to secure their seats. I think it's key, and many Democrats in the past couple of sessions have led the fight for redistricting reform and creating a third-party independent commission. And we finally got a breakthrough this past session where legislation was passed. And both sides are now arguing that if one takes the House, they're going to lose the ability for independent redistricting reform. But records show forth. The Republican in the House of Delegates have blocked the independent commission for years to come, and finally, they're just allowing it to pass. So I support it, and I think I will continue to fight for it when elected to make sure that it's passed again.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Mr. Milde, do you support a state constitutional amendment to create a bipartisan redistricting commission to draw the boundaries for the Commonwealth's House and Senate districts?
You know, I have signed up for with a group, Virginia One, that's against gerrymandering. I don't know if by signing I have supported a constitutional amendment, but I certainly completely agree with the words of my opponent that we need to do something and set up something more less bias to try to pick our boundaries. I do not know if an amendment to the Constitution of Virginia is the right way to go or not, but the way we're doing it now, where the voters are not choosing their elected leaders, the elected leaders are choosing their voters, is not the way to go.
Just as a point of reference, Republican Majority Leader Todd Gilbert stated a couple days ago that when they voted for redistricting reform, this bill that passed, the Senate resolution, was for a constitutional amendment. And House Majority Leader Todd Gilbert said he supported it and he was for it, and that's what the Republicans meant.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Next question to Mr. Cole. We have a lot of veterans in Virginia, veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan in particular, and many have had trouble adapting to civilian life. What ideas do you have for helping these young people?
I think it's really a prime opportunity. With this being an area where we have Quantico, we have Fort Belvoir. A lot of people live right here in the 28th District and they commute. And many people find out that they retire when they're here, or once they get out of their service, they stay right here. I think we need to have measures in place that are going to help them get acclimated back to civilian life. One of the things we introduced back in 2017 was fighting for not taxing retired military pay. So for many people who find their homes here, we want to make sure they enjoy living here, and we're one of only a few states that does that. On top of that, I think we can look for veterans courts to make sure that they find success, that they're finding integration into the community, and that we're helping them find housing, that we're helping them find jobs, because when many people come back from war, when they get out of service, they have no one to fight for them, and we need to fight for our soldiers.
Yes, another issue we agree on completely. That legislation, I think, makes a lot of sense also. When they mandate it down to the local level, of course, we have to be careful about property taxes, unfunded mandates. As a board member, I was acutely aware of those. But I support giving more tax breaks for vets. We need veteran services in Stafford. We really don't have them. They have to drive far away to get those. Dumfries, I guess, is the closest. We tried to get a TRICARE Plus facility next to the hospital, and that failed recently. We all should have read that they're doing something just as grand, if not better, for veterans, a facility next to, on Route 3 in Fredericksburg, the Gateway area. So I support that. Our veterans add so much to our community. We need to take care of them at every step of the way, and we need to keep them here, not just the ones that are adjusting that are coming back from various stations.
I will ask the next question of Mr. Milde. Would you be willing to promote the development of affordable and workforce housing? And if so, what are some of your ideas?
It's such a complex issue. Yes, the answer is yes. How you do it, I don't like subsidies where you're taxing, you're taking money and just subsidizing. I think Section 8, I know a lot of people depend on it, but I don't consider it to be an example of a success story. In land use development in Stafford County, we worked with rezonings of mixed-use communities, not enough, but the idea, the ones we've approved, some of which have not even been built, we try to always include a workforce or lower income housing component. They're different, of course. How to get there is the problem. I think working with developers has been one of the smartest ideas in my mind. I know there are funds that are funded by the state that basically subsidize housing. Those, I think, have good use. But I want to be careful they don't turn into something that resembles Section 8 housing. That's not. We don't want to make people dependent indefinitely on subsidized housing.
Thank you, Mr. Milde. Mr. Cole, would you be willing to promote the development of affordable and workforce housing? And if so, what are some of your ideas?
Absolutely. I think we do need to make a focus here. There have been numerous evictions in the Fredericksburg region over the past couple of years, and it's a little concerning for us. I think we need to consider possibly the creation of a housing authority. Focusing on workforce housing. I've always said if you live in Stafford County or work in Stafford County, you should be able to afford to live there as well without having roommates or multiple roommates in a house. We look at President Jimmy Carter and Habitat for Humanity, and they're doing a great work here in Stafford County and the city of Fredericksburg. I think we need to make awareness so more people know that they have housing opportunities available, bring them to that. And first and foremost, making state legislation that requires developers hold their feet to the fire and say when you create a housing development, a certain amount of housing units have to be affordable or workforce housing.
I'd like to add that I've been a great supporter of Habitat for Humanity so far back that Jimmy Carter was actually involved in some of the projects personally that I did in D.C. and as recently as the ones on South Street in Fredericksburg. And I'm in construction, so it's easy for us to help those projects, and I agree.
Thank you both, gentlemen.
Next question goes to Mr. Cole, and then, of course, passed off to Mr. Milde. Opioid-related deaths have killed more people in the Commonwealth than car accidents. That's a staggering statistic. What would you do to combat the opioid crisis, Mr. Cole?
Thank you. One of the key figures I found out a couple of weeks ago while talking to some healthcare workers in Mary Washington Hospital is that thanks to the Medicaid expansion, over 20,000 citizens in the Commonwealth of Virginia now receive help for their opioid addiction. We also look at Stafford County Sheriff's Department. They're doing a great work as far as training their deputies on how to deal with the situation when they come in contact with certain citizens. But I think it's first that we have to understand that this is a public health issue. And we need to help these people. They're not criminals. They're not bad people. They're dealing with a mental health issue and they're struggling, and we need to help them out. Have compassion as legislators, have compassion as local community leaders, and help them out.
You know,
Millie?
it is hard to find someone that hasn't been touched by drug addiction, alcohol addiction, which is to me the same thing, either personally or through someone they love. For me, it was firsthand. I spent my 19th birthday in jail, and I was struggling when I was 18 and 19 with drug addiction. And for me, I had to hit my bottom. That's what worked for me. 12-step programs were super important. Family, if you haven't run them off, is important. In drug treatment, I went to drug treatment when I was 18 or 19, and that's really expensive, and that's a big deal. And we don't have that. We need more money for drug treatment. So I think I can offer. I do not think the government programs necessarily work well at all. I think that's why NA and AA have been so successful, because they aren't, and people try to build off of those in some government programs. You'll be hard pressed to find someone that says the government helped them through an addiction. At least I haven't met too many people like that, and I have known many addicts in my life.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. The next question I'm going to pose to Mr. Milde. The previous session in Richmond this year was contentious, to say it nicely. Many Democrats called for the resignation of the current governor, Ralph Northam. And as we know, Mr. Northam is still the top elected official in the state. So how, going back into this next session, if you're elected, how do you propose working together in the legislature to advance the needs of the citizenry in your district?
Well, the governor is still the governor, and so if I were to be elected, I would work with the governor. I find it ironic that the rules that were set forth, I think, by the opposing party, I don't mean to be partisan, but the idea that the Democrats seem to be the ones that really wanted to dig back into people's yearbooks, if you will. Kavanaugh is a great example. Then to have such a high-profile Democrat governor embarrass Virginia with a similar problem, I think is irony at its worst. My opponent and I both, at some point, asked for the resignation of our governor. I would, but if he were there, but he takes money from him since then. But if I were there, I would just work with him. I think sometimes, you have to just deal with the hand you're dealt. Work with the hand you're dealt.
Mr. Milde, thank you. Mr. Cole, I'll clarify, both Democrats and Republicans called for the resignation of Governor Ralph Northam. If you're elected to this next upcoming session of the General Assembly, how will you work together with your fellow legislators and the governor to pass legislation that will advance the needs of your district constituents?
Absolutely. I serve as the president for Stafford County's NAACP, and with that position, I did call for the governor's resignation. As a black individual, I did not find the revelation of the yearbook pictures surprising. It was the way he handled it. I've had numerous conversations with the governor. The governor has called me as a pastor to pray for him. And one thing I said was, if we called for his resignation and the Democratic Party called for his resignation and he did not resign, I'm not going to be an obstructionist. I'm going to continue to work with him. And as a black individual, I'm going to share with him how he hurt the black community and how he can do better. So as a black legislator, number one, I will work with him. I will show him the issues that are at hand and what we can do better, like taking out the Union Hill situation by working for criminal justice reform, by showing that people can receive reparations through college education. These are many different efforts we can share with the governor to work together, not just to better the black community, but the entire Commonwealth of Virginia.
Thank you both.
Mr. Milde, this is your first crack at this question. Sea levels are rising, and this is a major concern to Virginia's economically vital coastline, which includes some of your district. What do you think the state should be doing to try to combat increased flooding, reduce shoreline, damage to our industries, perhaps even damage to our naval facilities in Norfolk?
I do not know. I have not seen a study that convinces me that there's an imminent danger of losing shoreline in Stafford County, although it may exist, and then I would question it to see if I trust it. But I'm completely on board for smart energy, less dependence on foreign sources of energy, and I certainly don't like pollution and believe in all types of energy that's being created being of the clean type, clean coal, if you will. I do not subscribe to the RGGI or the New Green Deal that my opponent has endorsed. I think they are vastly, wildly reckless and too expensive and will crush us in a way economically that will make it hard for us to have the money to do things like, if we wanted to work on green initiatives.
Thank you, Mr. Milde. Mr. Cole.
Our environment is in dire straits right about now. Climate change is not a me issue or an opponent issue or their issue. It's an our issue. So we have to fight to protect the climate. When you look at Hampton Roads, I think it was projected in the next 30 to 40 years or so, there will be significant erosion as far as sea level rising and covering over Hampton Roads. And even in the Brook area of Stafford County and White Oak area, which is on the Potomac, which is on the creek out there, they potentially could see rises in the water level as well. As my opponent mentioned, RGGI is a cap for a cap for corporations which put out emissions. And if we have to pay for our emissions every year, why can't these corporations do it? On top of that, the Virginia Green New Deal is not an environmental plan, it's an intersectional plan. So while it helps fight for the environment, it helps fight for equality for people and also for the economy as well.
RGGI is a cap and trade scheme, and even, again, the Freelance Star, not a conservative paper, came out and said that it really hasn't, that states that have endorsed us and used those types of mechanisms, it hasn't changed their footprint, if you will, their carbon output. So I think some of these are misplaced, and that one is a bad idea.
All right, gentlemen, this question goes to Mr. Cole. This past legislative session, Delegate Kathy Tran and her bill came under fire because it talked about post-birth abortion. The governor went on WTOP and also garnered headlines for his description of how that process would work out. So the question is, what's your position on abortion legislation in Virginia?
Absolutely. That's been a very contentious point all throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. That bill that Delegate Kathy Tran introduced was nothing new. As a state legislature's chief of staff and former staffer, that had been introduced for the at least past 5 or 6 sessions. And what ended up happening was that was a bill that was actually passed by a Republican back in the early 70s. I stand to say I trust women. I can't pass judgment and say when situations arise what they're doing or what they're going through. I believe we have to have protections in place to let women have the right to choose. And Roe versus Wade is the law of the land.
Yes, it is. And I am pro-life. I don't shy away from that. But and reasonable people disagree on that issue. People I care about. But what we should all agree on is that to kill a child after it's born, or let it die, or kill one right before it's born, or partial birth abortion is barbaric. And those bills, whether they were supported by Republicans in the past or not, have been co-sponsored year after year by Democrats. I have every reason to believe that my opponent would support that bill, and even the words I've just heard now make it sound like he would. And I think that's a horrible idea. I don't think, that's where the conversation is going to be. And my opponent takes a lot of money from organizations like Planned Parenthood, and I think he probably believes it, and he also is somewhat obligated to support that type of legislation. I think it's a really bad idea anywhere, and I don't want it in Virginia.
So just as a slight rebuttal, when it comes to late-term abortions, that's a situation where it requires a woman's health or the health of the baby that's in dire need. So that, again, should be left up to a doctor and that female, not legislators in Richmond. And furthermore, if a baby is born, I believe we should protect it, not kill the baby.
Thank you, gentlemen.
And this is the last question, gentlemen. Start off with Mr. Milde. Virginia Beach was witness to a mass shooting earlier this year. There have been several just this year throughout the county. Some legislators and various activist groups asked the Commonwealth to enact enhanced background checks and red flag laws. Others would like to ban semi-automatic weapons and certain sized magazines. What are your positions on this issue?
Well, unfortunately, I knew very well, I worked closely with one of the people that was killed at Virginia Beach. He used to work here in Stafford for us at a higher level, one of our, right underneath administrators level. And also another good friend of mine's daughter was killed at Virginia Tech. So these are horrific situations that make passions run high. But the question about what we should do about it is one that I think is, first of all, I think it's definitely mental health. Anyone that would wake up in the morning or plan to murder, mass murder their coworkers or people in a school with them is something that is definitely a mental health problem. I don't want to infringe on people's constitutional protections if it's not going to work. Red flag laws have been used 36,000 times since 1996, and the studies show that they have not done anything to reduce the severity, the suicide rate, anything. Also, assault weapons bans have not worked. We had it for 10 years under Clinton. They did not do anything to stop people from killing, these mass murders and people from killing each other. So I'd like to study something that works.
As relates to common sense gun legislation, I think we call it common sense gun legislation because the majority of people agree with it, and more importantly, the majority of Virginians agree with it. 91% of Virginians agree with a background check, a universal background check that can be implemented for small cases such as going to gun shows. I think it's over 80% of citizens agree with red flag laws. This is a due process where a family member or a loved one can express their concern about a family member or loved one, take it to a judge. A judge can consider the situations, have a police officer or law enforcement agent come to the house, determine the situations, confiscate the guns for a moment, for a time being, and then return them as need be. And on top of that, registration for guns as well. We do it with our cars, we do it with our dogs, we do it with any other thing, but why can't we do it for these weapons? We are not trying to infringe upon the Second Amendment right. I do agree people deserve to protect themselves and protect their own land, but we also have to protect public safety as well.
And you know, people might not agree with 80% might not agree if that's a true, an accurate assessment. If they knew that they hadn't worked, red flag laws just haven't worked, and the Constitution doesn't protect our dogs or our cars. That it does absolutely talk about our right to keep and bear arms. And so, doing something that affects the Constitution really is important. It has to be thoughtful and not just a passion, born out of passion and fear. I think we need to study what will work. And I didn't say I wouldn't study different kinds of background checks. Of course, in Virginia, you do get a background check when you buy a gun at a gun show. At least when I did. So how much that would really change things is a question.
Thank you.
And that concludes our questions. If we could go ahead to our 1-minute closing remarks.
Well, again, I'm sorry.
I'm going to turn over to
I don't even know.
You're going to go ahead and. Well, let's start with Mr. Milde. Your
Okay.
1-minute closing remark.
I will. I'm going to read because I want to not miss this. But you know, what is the role of an elected representative to government? Having been elected to the Stafford Board, I believe that we send our people there, to be our voice in government. They should focus on improving our quality of life. In Stafford, that means focusing on relieving transportation, gridlock, improving schools, and protecting our community from overdevelopment. That's one of the biggest things I hear. On ending gridlock, I successfully fought. I took the lead, 3 times chairman of FAMPO, 2 times chairman of the VRE. I took the lead on securing $1.3 billion in funding for projects that are being built all over Stafford. They're going to be in your way. It's going to be very inconvenient, but we're making a lot of progress on transportation. On our schools, I always supported budgets that increased teachers' pay, that renovated schools and built new ones. And of course, on protecting our unspoiled land from overdevelopment, I led the way on all the conservation effort programs that are now working in Stafford County and some that are yet to work. So I'd like you to take a look at my record of achievement here in Stafford and send me to Richmond, and I'll use what I've learned here and get even better results.
Well, thank you again for the opportunity to share our views here. As someone who grew up in Stafford County and lived here, whose family has great ties here, it's incumbent on me to fight for our community. My opponent has stated well that his record showed proof, and I think we should consider his record. When we look at his opportunity as a Board of Supervisors, he took over $8.3 million from the schools to support transportation. While we do need to support transportation, that's what happens when you cut taxes. You have to rob Peter to pay Paul. We don't have time for politicians that want to be supported by developers and feed their egos. We have to fight for the people of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and we're going to do that come November the 5th.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us with CBTV News and also Potomac Local, in the 38th District House debate.